Daniel, don't move.
Yeah, I had a feeling this was coming.
The reprinted tickets, the cash you took, nearly $400,000.
Once is a mistake. Twice is suspicious. Daniel Lee did this thousands of times across nearly 4 years and left a paper trail on every single one. He just never expected anyone to count.
Had to end sometime, right? Nothing goes on forever.
3.5 years, Daniel, one ticket at a time.
So that's what got me, huh? Honestly, I thought you'd find the whole thing a lot sooner. I'm actually...
Daniel, you need to step out of the booth right now. Hands where I can see them. He did not move at first. He just stared at the small monitor of the ticket terminal, the cursor still blinking after the last sale of the afternoon. The detective repeated himself, quieter the second time. By that night, NYPD Major Case Squad investigators had seized the box office hard drive at Pier 86, every reprint log from the past 3 months, and a small spiral notebook Daniel Lee kept tucked beneath the cash drawer. Almost $400,000, skimmed one paper ticket at a time from a museum built on a retired aircraft carrier. Before we go any further, I want you to think about something. How many times have you handed cash to a cashier and walked away without looking at the receipt? Drop a number in the comments, and if you are new here, hit subscribe. This channel does not let stories like this stay buried. Daniel Lee was born in Flushing, Queens in the spring of 1986, the only son of Korean immigrants who had arrived in New York 11 years earlier. His father drove a Lincoln Town car for a black car service that ran out of a dispatch office on Northern Boulevard. His mother worked the morning shift at a dry cleaner on Roosevelt Avenue, returning home each afternoon smelling faintly of perchloroethylene and starch. The family lived in a 2-bedroom walk-up above a Korean grocery, and Daniel slept on a daybed in what was technically the living room until he was 14. The museum, in a way, had always been there. When Daniel was 7, his father drove him into Manhattan on a slow Sunday morning and parked illegally on 12th Avenue so they could walk the deck of the USS Intrepid together. His father had served his Korean Army conscription on a destroyer in the 1970s and stood in front of the fighter jets on the flight deck for a long time, naming the ones he recognized in Korean. Daniel held a folded paper map with a child-sized admission ticket stapled to the corner. He kept that ticket in a shoebox under his daybed for the next decade. He went to Francis Lewis High School in Fresh Meadows, the kind of overcrowded New York public school where a sharp kid could disappear into the middle of a class of 40. His teachers wrote on his transcripts that he was quiet, conscientious, occasionally distracted, and capable of more if pushed. Nobody pushed. He played JV tennis for 1 season, joined the math team for 2 months, and graduated in 2004 with a high B- average and no real plan. His parents had assumed he would go to Queens College. He enrolled, then withdrew after 3 semesters when his father's hours at the car service were cut and the tuition stopped making sense. For the next 8 years, Daniel worked the kind of jobs that pay weekly. He bussed tables at a Korean barbecue restaurant on Northern Boulevard. He stocked shelves overnight at a Stop and Shop in Bayside. He spent 2.5 years as a cashier at a Duane Reade in Long Island City, where he earned $10.25 an hour and was named Employee of the Month twice for what his manager called unfailing politeness with difficult customers. He learned in those years every shape of register interface in Midtown retail. He learned how to count down a drawer at the end of a shift. He learned how to spot a past counterfeit 20 by feel. He also learned, watching the assistant manager skim from the register one slow Tuesday afternoon in 2011, exactly how that was done. He moved out of his parents' apartment at 26 and rented a small 1-bedroom in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, on 54th Street near 8th Avenue. The rent was $975. He took the N train to work and read paperback military histories on the long ride. When the Duane Reade closed in early 2015, he was unemployed for nearly 6 months. He answered an online posting in October for a ticket cashier position at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. The starting hourly wage was $13.50. The hiring manager noted on his application that he presents calmly, has cash handling experience, and expressed genuine interest in the institution's mission. He started on October 19th, 2015. He told his mother, on the phone the night before, that he was going to work at the same museum his father had taken him to when he was 7. His mother said in Korean that this was a good sign. Daniel agreed. The Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum sits at the western end of West 46th Street, moored along the Hudson at Pier 86. The flight deck of the retired carrier rises 3 stories above the water, lined with 28 aircraft, including the prototype Space Shuttle Enterprise, a Lockheed A-12 reconnaissance jet, and a British Airways Concorde. On a busy summer Saturday, the museum can move more than 10,000 visitors across its turnstiles between 10 in the morning and 6 in the evening. On a slow Tuesday in February, it might move 600. The box office at the time Daniel was hired was a small structure on the pier itself, just before the gangway that led up to the carrier. It had 4 service windows facing the street. 3 were used during peak season. 1 sat closed most days. Inside the booth, each window had a Microsoft Surface terminal running a third-party ticketing platform, a connected receipt printer, a connected admission ticket printer that produced the small perforated paper passes visitors handed to the turnstile staff, a credit card reader, and a locking cash drawer. The cash workflow was straightforward on paper. A visitor approached the window. The cashier asked the size of the party and the type of admission. The cashier rang the sale into the terminal. The terminal printed a receipt and 1 or more admission tickets, each with a unique barcode keyed to that specific transaction. The visitor paid by card or cash. If cash, the cashier dropped the bills into the drawer and counted change from the drawer. At the end of the shift, the cashier counted the drawer down to a $400 starting bank and reported the variance, if any, to the senior box office supervisor on duty. The system audited itself, in theory. The number of tickets printed in a shift was supposed to match the number of paying transactions recorded. The cash in the drawer at the end of the day was supposed to match the cash totals reported by the terminal. If a visitor walked away from the window with a printed ticket, the museum's books showed that ticket had been paid for. The vulnerability was small and quiet. The ticketing platform allowed cashiers to reprint a previously sold ticket. It was a feature designed for legitimate reasons. A visitor's printer had jammed mid-print and produced a torn ticket. A tourist had lost their pass between the box office and the turnstile and come back, embarrassed, asking for a replacement. A guest services manager had voided a sale and needed to reissue. The reprint function existed because real museums on real piers in real Manhattan summers have 10,000 things go wrong every Saturday, and a system that cannot reprint a $5 piece of perforated paper is a system that grinds to a halt by lunch. The reprint function did not require a manager override. It did not generate a separate audit entry that the senior supervisor reviewed at end of shift. It logged the reprint inside the terminal's database, but the daily reconciliation report the supervisors actually read tracked sales, not reprints. The senior box office staff knew the function existed. They did not check it. Nobody checked it. Daniel learned the reprint function during his first week on the floor. By the end of his second week, he understood, in a way nobody at the museum had ever bothered to articulate out loud, that the function created a small gap. A cashier could reprint a ticket that had already been sold, hand that reprint to a paying cash visitor, and pocket the cash. The museum's books would show a single sale. The turnstile would scan 2 valid barcodes that day, but it scanned tens of thousands of barcodes every weekend, and nobody reconciled the scan logs against the sales logs. He did not act on this knowledge for almost 6 months. The first reprint Daniel sold for cash was on a Saturday in April 2016. He had been on the job a little under 6 months. According to the spiral notebook he later kept under the cash drawer, that first sale was an adult walk-up admission at $33. He printed the legitimate ticket for the previous transaction, slid it back across the counter as part of the reprint queue, and pocketed the $33 in cash. He went home on the N train that night with the money folded inside a paperback copy of Stephen Ambrose's Band of Brothers. For the first 3 months, he kept the pace low. one reprint sale a week, sometimes two. Always on Saturdays or Sundays when the line at his window stretched 20 deep, and the senior supervisor was busy at a different window. He chose cash families paying for groups of 3 or 4, where the dollar amount was high enough to be worth the risk, and the family was rushed enough not to wait for a long printer cycle. He learned which times of day brought the slowest supervision. He learned the rotation of the supervisors themselves. He learned that one supervisor, a woman named Marisol, watched him more closely than the others. He took no reprints during her shifts. By summer 2016, he was running between 3 and 5 reprint sales a weekend. He kept the cash in an envelope in a metal lockbox in his bedroom closet. He did not deposit any of it. He did not change his lifestyle. He still rode the N train. He still ate his mother's kimbap from a Tupperware container on his break. The only luxury he allowed himself that first summer was a $65 pair of reading glasses he had been putting off for 2 years. By late 2016, the pace had changed. He had begun keeping the spiral notebook. He logged each reprint sale in his own private shorthand: date, window number, approximate time, amount. The notebook lived under the cash drawer of whichever window he opened that morning, and he carried it home at night in his backpack. The point of the notebook, he later told investigators, was to keep an honest tally for himself. He wanted to know exactly how much he had taken. He did not want to lose track. He did not want to be greedy. The escalation was gradual, but steady. In 2017, his second full year of stealing, the notebook logged just under $90,000 in reprint cash. In 2018, it logged just under $130,000. By the first half of 2019, the running total in the notebook had crossed $390,000. His method matured. He learned to select reprint sources carefully. The best source was a single adult transaction from less than 10 minutes earlier, when the original buyer was almost certainly inside the turnstile already and gone. He learned to time his reprints to the long 30-second pauses between the supervisor walk-bys he had silently clocked over months. He learned to keep small bills in his own pocket so he could give change for a cash sale without going to the official drawer, which would have logged the drawer open event against an unmatched transaction. The signs were there. They had always been there. The museum's annual ticket revenue had grown year over year as visitor counts grew, but the growth in the cash share lagged the growth in the card share by a margin that nobody flagged. The variance reports on Daniel's window were consistently and suspiciously clean. He was, statistically, the best cash-handling cashier in the box office. His drawer balanced down to the dollar nearly every single shift. His co-workers occasionally came up $40 over or $15 short. Daniel never did. He was, in the language of his performance review for 2017, exceptionally accurate, calm under pressure, and an example for newer cashiers. Nobody noticed. Nobody checked. The reprint log sat untouched in the ticketing platform's database. The turnstile scan log sat untouched in the entry system's database. The two systems did not speak to each other except at the most surface level of daily totals, and the daily totals never tripped because Daniel kept his theft as a small, steady fraction of a very large weekend cash float. He lived almost entirely the same life he had lived before. He did not buy a car. He did not move out of Sunset Park. He did not vacation. He kept the cash in the lockbox in his closet, stacked in growing envelopes labeled by year. The closest he came to a visible purchase was a used 2014 Sony Bravia he carried home from a PC Richard & Son on 3rd Avenue in January 2019. He paid in cash. The clerk asked if he wanted the extended warranty. He said no, thank you. The catalyst, when it came, was almost embarrassingly small. It was not a sting. It was not an undercover detective. It was a tourist. In early June 2019, a family of 4 from Toledo, Ohio, walked up to Daniel's window on a hot Saturday afternoon. The father paid $126 in cash for 2 adult tickets and 2 child tickets. Daniel handed him 4 perforated admission passes and a paper receipt. The family walked to the turnstile. The turnstile staff scanned the first ticket. The barcode came up red. The staff member, a recently hired part-time college student named Justin Park, scanned the second ticket. Also red. He scanned the third. Red. He looked up at the father in the sun visor and said, politely, that the tickets had already been used. He assumed it was a printer error. He walked the family back to the box office and asked Daniel to reprint the passes. Daniel, by his own later admission, felt his stomach drop. He reprinted the tickets calmly. He apologized. He said the printer must have caught a bad reprint from earlier. The family thanked him, walked back to the turnstile, scanned through, and disappeared into the museum. Justin Park went back to his post. He thought about it for the rest of his shift. He was 20 years old and had been at the museum for 4 months. He was, in the words of his own supervisor, observant in a way that surprised people. He had noticed, over those 4 months, that the turnstile system flagged previously scanned barcodes more often than it should. He had assumed it was a software glitch. After the Toledo family, he was not so sure. That Sunday, he sent a quiet email to the museum's operations director. He attached 3 screenshots from the turnstile scan log showing duplicate barcode reads on 3 separate days that week. He wrote one sentence. "This might be a glitch, but I wanted to flag it." The operations director did not see the email until Monday afternoon. She forwarded it to the museum's chief financial officer with a question mark in the subject line. The CFO opened it on Tuesday morning. She did not assume a glitch. She had spent 11 years in nonprofit finance and had once caught a museum gift shop manager skimming $60,000 in inventory over 4 years. She knew what duplicate scans on the same barcode usually meant. The CFO called the museum's general counsel that same Tuesday afternoon. By the end of the week, the museum had quietly retained a small forensic accounting firm in Midtown and pulled 3 months of reprint logs and turnstile scan logs into a single comparison spreadsheet. The pattern emerged within 4 hours. Almost every duplicate scan in the turnstile log traced back to a reprint event in the ticketing platform. And almost every one of those reprint events traced back to the same employee logon. The operations director made a list of every reprint Daniel had logged in the past 3 months. The list ran to 411 entries. The museum did not confront him. The museum called the NYPD. We are heading into the investigation now. If this story has held your attention this far, that is because it deserved to be told properly. Subscribe if you agree. We do this every single week, and these cases need more eyes on them. Detective Sergeant Anthony Russo of the NYPD's Major Case Squad caught the file on a Thursday morning in late June 2019. Major Case typically handled bank robberies, art thefts, and high-dollar commercial fraud. A museum cashier was, by the squad's usual standards, small potatoes. The dollar figure was not small potatoes. By the time the forensic accountants had finished extending the comparison spreadsheet from 3 months back to Daniel Lee's full hire date, the number had climbed past $390,000. Russo spent the next 2.5 weeks building the case before he ever walked onto Pier 86. He pulled Daniel's W-2s from the museum. He pulled the reprint logs back to October 2015 and confirmed that the pattern began in April 2016, almost exactly 6 months after Daniel's hire date. He pulled the turnstile scan logs and ran the duplicate barcode comparison against every weekend shift Daniel had worked since 2016. The comparison was clean and damning. He pulled Daniel's bank records. The bank records showed almost nothing. Daniel had not deposited the cash. He had not bought a house. He had not bought a car beyond a used Sony television. The money was somewhere physical. Russo also did something he later said he almost did not do. He pulled the security footage from the box office for a random sample of 20 shifts in 2018. The camera angle was not great. It pointed at the customer side of the window, not at the cashier's hands, but it caught enough. On 12 of those 20 shifts, Russo could clearly identify the moment Daniel reprinted a ticket, slid it across the counter, and pocketed the cash. He could see the small motion of the right hand to the front pocket of the polo shirt. He could see it 12 times. The smoking gun, in the end, was not the footage. It was not even the forensic spreadsheet, though the spreadsheet would have been enough to indict. The smoking gun was the spiral notebook. When the search warrant was executed at the apartment on 54th Street on the afternoon of the arrest, detectives found 3 separate caches of cash. There was a metal lockbox in the bedroom closet containing $142,000 in banded 50s and 100s, organized by year in manila envelopes. There were 2 shoeboxes under the daybed in the spare room, containing another $98,000. There was a sealed plastic bin in the storage cage in the building's basement, accessed by a key Daniel kept on his regular keyring, containing $151,000 more. And in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus, detectives found the spiral notebook. The notebook ran 51 pages. Every page was filled with Daniel's small, even handwriting. Each entry was a single line: date, / window number, / approximate time, / dollar amount. The final entry was dated 3 days before the arrest. The running total at the bottom of the last page, underlined twice in blue ballpoint pen, read $391,840. Russo later said in a deposition that the notebook was, in 23 years on the job, the most polite confession he had ever seen. Daniel had not just stolen the money, he had documented it, every dollar, for 3 years and 3 months. The arrest was scheduled for the afternoon of July 11th, 2019. Russo wanted Daniel at his window when it happened. He wanted the box office computer seized in the same hour the suspect was taken into custody, before anyone could log in remotely or delete a reprint queue. He wanted the spiral notebook found in the place where it lived. He coordinated the operation with the museum's general counsel, the operations director, and one senior supervisor, Marisol, the one whose shifts Daniel had always avoided. At 2:47 in the afternoon on Thursday, July 11th, 2019, 3 plainclothes detectives and 1 uniformed officer walked down Pier 86 from West 46th Street. The line at the box office was short. The tourists in shorts and sun visors stepped aside without quite knowing why. Detective Russo stopped at the 3rd window. Daniel looked up from his terminal. He was wearing his navy polo, his badge, and the wire-frame glasses he had bought 4 years earlier with money he had not yet stolen. Daniel Lee? Yes, sir. NYPD Major Case Squad. I need you to step out of the booth right now, hands where I can see them. Daniel did not move at first. He looked at the small monitor of the ticket terminal. The cursor was still blinking after the last sale of the afternoon. He looked back at Russo. Sir, Daniel, step out of the booth. Daniel stood up slowly. He set his hands on the countertop, palms down, the way he had seen people do in television shows. He walked out the side door of the box office and onto the pier. The uniformed officer placed his hands behind his back and applied handcuffs gently. The tourists in the line behind him stared. Do you know what this is about? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the Hudson River. The British Airways Concorde sat on the pavilion just past the gangway, its nose pointed slightly down, the way it always was. Yes, sir, I think I do. Tell me what you think it is about, Daniel. The reprints. Russo nodded once. He did not write anything down. There were 3 other officers on the pier with him, whose entire job in that moment was to watch and listen. How long, Daniel? About 3.5 years, sir. How much? Daniel was quiet again. He looked at the deck plating of the carrier above the pier. He answered in a voice so quiet that Russo had to lean in. Almost $400,000. It's in my apartment, most of it. There's a notebook, in the kitchen drawer, the one with the menus. Russo later said in court that he had been prepared for a denial. He had been prepared for a request for a lawyer. He had been prepared for a tantrum. He had not been prepared for what Daniel actually did, which was to answer every question politely and accurately for the 8 minutes it took to walk him to the unmarked car parked on 12th Avenue. At the car, before he was placed in the back seat, Daniel said one more thing on his own. "I am sorry. I don't know if that matters, but I am." Then he got in the car, and the door closed, and the conversation, as far as his life as a free man was concerned, was effectively over. Daniel Lee was arraigned the morning of July 12, 2019 in Manhattan Criminal Court on a single count of grand larceny in the second degree under New York Penal Law, Section 155.4(o), which covers theft of property valued in excess of $50,000. The Class C felony carried a statutory maximum of 15 years. Bail was set at $50,000 cash. His parents posted it the next morning, using a small line of equity they had built on the dry cleaner in Flushing. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office assigned Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Sandoval to the case. Sandoval was 38, a graduate of Cardozo Law, and had spent 6 years in the office's Financial Frauds Bureau. She told the museum's general counsel in their first meeting that she intended to seek prison time. The total dollar amount, she said, made probation politically impossible. Daniel retained a defense attorney named Howard Klein. Klein had practiced criminal defense in Manhattan for 31 years. He had seen this case before in 100 small variations. He knew there was no winning at trial. The notebook alone made trial unwinnable. He spent the next 9 months working toward a plea. The forensic accounting in the discovery file was airtight. The reprint logs, the turnstile scans, the security footage, the notebook, the cash in the apartment, the cash in the storage cage. Daniel had not invested the money. He had not laundered it. He had not even particularly hidden it. Klein told him, in their second meeting at the office on Court Street, that the only argument left was mitigation. Why he had done it. What kind of person he was. Why prison time should land at the low end rather than the high end of the range. Daniel did not have a good answer for the first question. He told Klein that he had not stolen out of need. His rent had always been paid. His parents had not been in crisis. The Duane Reade closing had been hard, but the Intrepid job had stabilized him within months. He told Klein that he had started because he had realized he could, and that he had continued because the money had become a thing in itself, separate from any plan to spend it. The closest he came, in those meetings, to a real explanation was a single sentence Klein wrote down in his notebook and later quoted in the sentencing memo. "I wanted to see how much I could take without anyone noticing." The plea was finalized in April 2020. Daniel pled guilty to a single count of grand larceny in the second degree. The plea agreement called for full restitution of $391,840, which Daniel was already in a position to pay because the seized cash exceeded the total by several $1,000s. The plea agreement also called for a state prison sentence of between 2 and 6 years, with the exact term to be determined by the sentencing judge. Sentencing was held on August 17, 2020, before Justice Eleanor Brennan in Manhattan Supreme Court. The museum's CFO read a victim impact statement on behalf of the institution. She did not raise her voice. She said the museum had spent the past year auditing every cash workflow in every department, that 2 employees had been let go for reasons unrelated to Daniel but uncovered in the same review, and that the museum had spent over $200,000 on the audit itself, on new point-of-sale software, and on the integration that now reconciled turnstile scans against reprint events in real time. "The money is being returned," she said. "The trust is not." Justice Brennan listened. She had presided over financial crimes for 11 years. When she spoke at sentencing, she did so for nearly 6 minutes. The relevant portion of her statement ran as follows. "Mr. Lee, what makes this case unusual is not the amount, although the amount is substantial. What makes this case unusual is the duration and the discipline. You stole for 3.5 years. You did not stop. You did not lose track. You documented every theft in a notebook you kept under the cash drawer of an institution that trusted you to handle its money. You did not steal because you were desperate. You stole because you discovered that you could, and because you wanted to see how far the gap would take you. The museum did not catch you. A part-time college student did. The court is mindful of your cooperation, your full restitution, and your guilty plea. The court is also mindful that the people who walked up to your window on Saturday afternoons for 3.5 years were not customers of a private business. They were visitors to a public memorial. Many of them were veterans. Many of them were children. Each of them paid you in good faith. You converted that good faith into envelopes in a lockbox. She sentenced Daniel Lee to 4 years in state prison, to be served at the Mid-State Correctional Facility in Marcy, New York, followed by 3 years of post-release supervision. Restitution was ordered in the full amount and paid out of the seized cash on the day of sentencing. Daniel served 2 years and 3 months of the 4-year sentence before being released on parole in November 2022. He returned to his parents' apartment in Flushing. The dry cleaner on Roosevelt Avenue had closed during the pandemic. His father was driving for a rideshare company that ran out of an office in Bayside. His mother was working part-time at a Korean bakery near the 7 train. The Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, in the years since, has rebuilt its box office workflow nearly from scratch. The reprint function still exists because it has to. Real museums on real piers in real Manhattan summers still have 10,000 things go wrong every Saturday. But every reprint now requires a manager override, generates an immediate alert, and is reconciled against the turnstile scan log at the close of every shift. The auditors who came in after the arrest told the museum's board, in a meeting that was not made public, but which was later described in deposition, that the vulnerability Daniel had exploited was the oldest one in retail: unwatched cash at the point of sale. They said it never really closes. They said the only thing you can do is watch. Daniel Lee, as of this recording, lives quietly with his parents in Flushing. He is not allowed to handle cash for any employer for the duration of his post-release supervision. He works at a small Korean-language bookstore on Northern Boulevard, where the owner pays him by direct deposit, and where, by the terms of his parole, he is never alone with the register. This case was quiet, but the case on the right-hand side is the loudest one we have ever covered. Click it now.